I'm Sidhartha Dash, or Sid Dash, and I'm the Chief Researcher at Chartis. And today we're going to be talking about leveraging technology in operational ALM. With that, I have an eminent practitioner, DN Prahlad, to discuss that with me. Could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Sid, for the opportunity to talk to you about this particular aspect, which is pretty close to my, intellectual challenges, some of the intellectual challenges that I've faced. My name, as Sid said, is D.N. Prahlad. I'm the non-executive chairman of Surya Software Systems, a company I founded. Surya FinTech is the division that works on this particular problem. Now, I have a history of being a techie. I was one of the first people to go to the US as a part of the Indian IT initiatives, an early member of Infosys, the 9th employee. Infosys went on to become a very large company. And post my exit from Infosys, I've started Surya. And of course, Infosys for me is like Hotel California. You can check out anytime, but you can never leave. So I had to go back onto the board of Infosys a few years back. And I've stepped off the board as well. So my passion and aim is always technology. So I hope that serves as a good introduction, Sid. If you want
No,
me
absolutely. That serves as a context for what we're going to be talking about today, which is really around the idea of leveraging technology in an ALM context. I mean, we know ALM is a broad discipline with many different strands, many different analytical models, and many different approaches that many institutions have taken. However, several things stand out. And with that, I would like to really ask you from a technological challenge perspective, where do you see the big challenges in implementing ALM systems, particularly in diverse, complex institutions, diverse, complex retail institutions, etc.?
That's a very interesting question. That's what we've been doing. The problem comes now when people start looking at more and more granular data. I'll classify the challenges into two parts. One is the data challenge, the other is the UX challenge. The data challenge becomes very obvious when you go and study the systems that exist, because ALM consumes virtually every piece of data that is in the bank, both on balance sheet and off balance sheet, as you're all very aware. Now, many of these systems that put entries into the balance sheet are, shall we say, with kindness, of different vintages, and therefore have their own technological backlog and their own technological debt to pay. That is one of the first things you will encounter when producing ALM systems at scale. And then on top of that, there are what I call run idiosyncrasies, which basically mean that these systems run at different times, posting to the trial balance. So therefore, it's not that at a particular time in the day, you have a consistent set of data everywhere. And generally, when that time comes, the data has become more or less useless. So this is one of the biggest challenges that you face. On top of that, the CIO's office will be constraining you with hardware, and you keep on asking for more and more hardware to throw at these problems. CIO, you're not the CIO's favorite person. They will have their own views of how much budgets they have, because this cannot be costing tons of money. And therefore, having, especially with the cloud being quite predominant now, cloud bills are becoming bigger and bigger. So we have to become extremely conscious of how much hardware you use, how much time you use on the cloud, how many resources you use on the cloud. And even if you're on-prem, it means that you have bigger capital expense bills to pay. Therefore, reducing the TCO, deepening the depth of data, the granularity of data, and connecting to variety of systems which are multiple in nature, multiple technologies, and possibly much older is one of the bigger challenges that you'll face. On top of that, many of our customers also have operations in multiple countries. And that brings its own dimension, because the base currency reporting involves reporting of certain positions in various countries, apart from the fact that those operations need to have their own local ALM. And this is, I guess, the challenge that we face. And all this has to be done in reasonable time and at reasonable cost. Why reasonable time? Because it's inevitable that there'll be days in a year called the month-end book closures or the quarter-end book closures where you will have data which is being finalized a little bit after the event. And therefore, there have to be adjustment entries and there be reruns, and this is a fact of life. And if you do not cater for that in your design of the system and application of technology, you will end up having difficulties on those days. And if you were to follow the wrong approaches, you'll really put users into trouble, because I know one system where it's run till the 8th and the 9th they get good data. So they have to go back and run, last day of the month, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, all over again. So reruns are a part of life and you have to design for this. So these are the biggest challenges that you'll face in implementing an ALM system in a complex bank.
Right. So that sort of answers the diversity question, the diversity, complexity, and variety question. What about the scalability dimension? I mean, one of the big issues is, as you have more granular data, as you sort of look at, and need to look at the granular cash flows, if you will, that sort of starts to balloon up the scale problem, if you will. And once you have a significantly large bank with a large number of customers, um, the scalability becomes a challenge. How do you address this whole scalability dimension? And of course, yeah.
It's a huge challenge. I mean, the scope of the system and the scope of data being collected is, from, let's say, when we started, we used to have this nice summaries being fed into the ALM system, and everyone was very happy with that. Today, we have to go to very, very deep granular levels, to the level of cash flows being, available for analysis. Yeah, that's a massive challenge that exists today. You're absolutely right. How do we go about solving it? I think we have to take a totally different view of the technologies that we use. Most banks, I think, use what I think are very old technologies. For instance, we are faced with this particular situation in a bank, to be more precise, in HDFC Bank, where the volumes of retail loans are very big. It's probably I know for people who are not aware, it is the fourth largest bank in the world by way of market cap, and second largest bank in the world in India, which is pretty big in itself. And we had this problem. And the competitor had predicted a runtime of 18 hours. So we went around solving this problem. So how do you do that? You question the technologies that you're using today, right? Now, for instance, a lot of data has to be stored. You're absolutely right. At a granular level, account level, we have to store cash flows. And then other attributes as well, which are required for LCR, for something else, for capital adequacy, etc., etc. So now, how do you go about this? You say, all right, how am I storing the data? Am I doing good, efficient storage? So we have to question that particular thing. We did. And we said, okay, the thought process behind our thinking or our logic was, let's go to the guy who stores all the data in the world. And the answer was Google. So Google does a fine, efficient job of storing data everywhere. Google is not a bank, but the technologies are appropriate. And they've grudgingly open sourced some of the formats that they use. So since our logic was that we have to use these formats, we chose Google's protocol buffer, which is a well-published open source format. And the nice result was that, let's say, I fed in a 120 gigabyte text file into it, came out smelling of 75 gigabytes, which gave me a lot of speed as well. And this bold, innovative way of saying, look, if I've got to go through every record in every file, I don't need all these weird file structures. I need to get into a different file structure. Is a decision that gave us speed. And just for your info, I think 15 million auto loans that they had on their books at that point, I'm talking about 5 years back, so it's not current data, we finished in converting that to cash flows in the space of about 116 seconds. And this was unheard of in that particular institution before. So there is meaning to application of this technology, going to the best in that technology and getting the best from that. And likewise, when we had to choose a programming language to do it, the obvious choice for everybody is to go to Java, and without thinking twice about what the implications are in terms of runtime, in terms of speed. So when we went to choose the language, I said, okay, we have to go to C because number one, it's very compact code, and it's also well established for a long time. But of course, my younger technical team said, look, you're an old man. We don't want this C kind of thing, but we'll come out with something which will fulfill your requirements. We get you. We get what you're saying. We hear you, Will. You're saying, give me fast, efficient code. And we hear you, but we'll find out something. And then they went, and this is the intriguing part. They sat and said, the people who write the most compact code are the guys who write for Internet of Things, or what was in my days called embedded systems. And they went and picked out the language of that crowd, which is a favorite. It's a language called Rust. And I did study the, what we call generated code. You see, I'm at the end of the day, I'm a techie. I like all these things. So we studied the generated code, and I certified that they were probably better than what I could write myself by hand. Forget C. So we said, fine, we do that. The end result is there for everyone to see. We now run in this particular bank that I mentioned, the HDFC Bank, for about for the functionality that we contracted with in the beginning, in about 22 minutes, and on a single commodity Linux server. So their TCO was nowhere near what the competitor was. It smashed down by quite a bit. Second thing said is about the flexibility we brought into the data architecture, because by storing at an account level and harmonizing the data across multiple files, we're able to aggregate it differently for different analytics. And that, I think, I can only illustrate with an example, because what this does is, let me take the example of the ARRBB. And this was not there when we installed the ALM system, came as a requirement later. We had, of course, programmed analytics and all that. But, it was not 100% because the final report was not out. The final regulation was not clear at that point, but we are very close to it. So we finished the analytic, and this bank was directed by the central bank in India called the Reserve Bank of India to be the first one to implement IRRBB. And then we were able to go there and get the data ready inside of a week because of the data harmonizer architecture that we had produced. And therefore, we were able to implement, like I said, in 3 weeks before, they could even print the purchase order for us. We were laughing, they were laughing all the way to the central bank before we were laughing into our bank, which, of course, later they made up things for us. So that's the flexibility. Now I'll leave you to ask any other questions you want me to focus on.
No, so I think this is interesting. I mean, the idea here obviously is, in order to get scalability with TCO and you have to look at the question slightly differently, and I think that's the point here, that the direct answer may not necessarily give you the right answer. So taking a slightly different view, I mean, one of the things we see increasingly these days is that the UX and the customer interactivity in our personal lives is very different from the in our formal office lives, if you will. It's perhaps it's a lot slower, perhaps different. How do you see that impacting impacting your customers, your technology, and the development cycle, if you will?
Oh, it's a big impact. I mean, there's a time when I thought my competition was perhaps IBM or Oracle or someone like that. But today my competition is Google and Amazon, because, I compete with Gmail. Gmail is a wonderful piece of software, which everyone knows has no limits, nothing. And that's the quality of software that people expect in their office as well. So the expectations have risen very heavily. And I cannot even count the number of meetings in which the CIO and myself must have sat and cried about how the systems that we have cannot keep up with the UX demands. Today, it's important to understand UX very differently in the context of what we see in the private life. So, for instance, let me give typical simple example, right? You see a report, you want to drill down into what went into making that number, right? This is something quite important. So now, when drill downs have to be provided at the right levels, at the right level of summarization, with the right set of rules, so on and so forth. So therefore, we need to be very conscious of how we provide the UX. Second, UX is specialized, right? And there are specialized presentation software like Tableau and Power BI. And I don't think we should be shy of using it. It increases the cost a little bit, but if you were to pretend that you will be as efficient as them, I think you're shortchanging your customers eventually. Because no matter what you do, you can't beat a group of, maybe 500 people going and specializing in UI design and UI artifacts. You can't beat them. And therefore, you better accept that if there are customers who like a higher quality UI and they're willing to pay for these kind of software, fine, we'll provide that. So we provide a set of interfaces which is ordinarily available, which is available in Tableau. For some reason, somebody picked it out of a sheet. You don't ask me why not Power BI. We'll probably do Power BI as well. And then, you leave it to the user. Finally, the power should go to the user. That is the theme of the UI UX that is running today. And
Right.
that's what the Googles and Amazons have told us.
Right. So with that, I think we some key themes sort of emerge, if you will. Needing to address scalability, etc. Think about the question differently, and potentially think about how to address the UX in not necessarily in the standard formats, but in more flexible and general industrial commercial formats. With that, we bring our discussion to a close today. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Sid, for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you.